What if the deepest parts of yourself, the ones you bury in shame, the ones you refuse to name, hold the exact blueprint of your destiny? A surgeon spends decades saving lives, yet secretly battles a hunger for control so violent it terrifies her. A CEO climbs to the top of his industry, only to crumble under the weight of a suppressed rage he has denied since childhood. These are not failures of character. These are cries of rebellion from the most misunderstood part of the human soul, the shadow. Society labels the shadow as a flaw, a mistake, a monster to chain in the basement of your psyche. But Carl Jung's research revealed a staggering truth. The traits you hate most about yourself are not your enemies. They are messengers. They carry a code, and that code, when decrypted, leads directly to the reason you were born. This is not a metaphor. Jung's work with patients proved that the shadow contains the very instincts, desires, and raw power your conscious mind has been trained to abandon. A woman who dismisses her ambition as selfishness might be silencing the part of her capable of leading nations. A man who shames his sensuality as sinful could be suffocating the artist within him. The shadow does not hide your darkness. It guards your light. You have felt this truth. In the moments you bit your tongue when you should have roared. In the relationships you sabotaged because vulnerability felt like a grenade in your hands. In the career that looks perfect on paper but drains your soul hour by hour. These are not random sufferings. They are the shadow pounding on the door of your awareness, demanding to be seen, to be used. Integration is not about healing. It is about claiming what is already yours. The founder of analytical psychology did not stumble upon this concept in a library. Jung faced his own shadow during a mental breakdown so severe he hallucinated conversations with his dead father. His journals from that period reveal a man fractured by the weight of his repressed genius. A man who had to let his psyche shatter to discover the diamond beneath. You are being invited into that same alchemy. The jealousy you rationalize away, it is a signal pointing to the life you are too afraid to want. The perfectionism you dress up as high standards, it is the ghost of a child who learned love must be earned through suffering. The shadow does not speak in whispers. It detonates. It floods your life with patterns of chaos, addiction, and self-sabotage until you stop trying to manage your pain and start mining it for power. This path is not safe. It demands brutal honesty. You will have to face the version of yourself that could ruin everything. The part that wants to burn bridges, dominate rivals, scream truths that would shatter your polished identity. But here is the secret Jungian philosophy demands you swallow. That version of you is not the problem. It is the solution. The world does not need more obedient shells of humans. It needs the feral, unedited force of souls who have stopped apologizing for their depths. The purpose of your life is not waiting to be found. It is waiting to be freed. By the end of this exploration, you will hold the tools to turn your deepest fears into fuel, your oldest wounds into weapons, and the parts of yourself you have been taught to hate into the foundation of your legacy. The shadow is not chasing you. It has been waiting for you to turn around. The question is no longer whether you have a shadow. The question is whether you will finally let it speak. A child is taught to hide their anger. A teenager learns to bury their curiosity about sex. An adult shames themselves for craving power. These rejected pieces do not vanish. They gather in the silent corners of your mind, forming a second self, a stranger you carry everywhere, yet refuse to acknowledge. This is the shadow, not a metaphor, not a poetic idea, a psychological fact. Carl Jung called it the thing a person has no wish to be. Think of it as a mental vault where you lock away every trait, desire, or impulse deemed unacceptable by your parents, your religion, or the invisible rulebook of your culture. Your kindness lives in the light. Your selfishness gets thrown into the vault. Your confidence is praised. Your arrogance gets sentenced to life in the dark. The shadow is not your evil twin. It is the debris of every time you were told, good people do not act like this. The vault never stays closed. A man who prides himself on patience suddenly explodes at a waiter over cold soup. A woman who identifies as progressive cringes at her own racist thought in a moment of stress. These are not moral failures. They are shadow eruptions, proof that the traits you disown do not die. They ferment. They mutate. They hijack your behavior when your guard is down. Jung did not discover the shadow by studying textbooks. He found it in the nightmares of his patients. A wealthy businessman, paralyzed by panic attacks, confessed fantasies of abandoning his family to live in the wilderness. A nun, praised for her piety, dreamed of smashing church windows with a crowbar. These were not random impulses. They were the shadows screaming, "You have buried half of yourself to fit in. Let me out, or I will burn your life down." You carry a vault, too. The jealousy you feel toward a friend's success, that is your disowned ambition knocking. The judgment you heap on someone's lifestyle, that is your repressed desire wearing a disguise. The shadow is not a flaw in your soul. It is a ledger of every instinct you have exiled to keep the peace, to be loved, to survive. Society calls this fragmentation growing up. A child's raw honesty becomes rude. A teenager's sexual curiosity becomes shameful. An employee's hunger for recognition becomes arrogant. You are taught to amputate these parts, not realizing you are cutting away your vitality. The person you call mature is often just a ghost, a hollowed-out version of yourself that society approves of. The cost of this amputation is not theoretical. A father who denies his need for solitude becomes resentful and distant. A leader who shuns her competitive drive becomes passive and indecisive. The traits you lock in the shadow do not stay contained. They leak into your relationships, your career, your health. They create patterns you cannot explain. Sudden outbursts, chronic guilt, a voice in your head that whispers, "This is not who you are meant to be." Integration begins with a single act of rebellion, staring into the vault, not to confess sins, not to wallow in shame, to reclaim stolen property. That selfish desire to prioritize your art over others' expectations, it might be the core of your life's work. That childish anger at injustice, it could be the spark of a revolution waiting to ignite. The shadow does not hide who you are. It hides who you could become if you stopped censoring your soul. Jungian philosophy does not ask you to love your shadow. It demands you negotiate with it. A sailor does not tame the storm. They learn to read the wind. Your rage, your lust, your greed, these are not curses. They are unrefined forces waiting for direction. The man who integrates his aggression becomes a protector. The woman who embraces her pride becomes a visionary. The shadow is not your opponent. It is your arsenal. The world will try to shrink you, to label your intensity too much, your boundaries selfish, your darkness dangerous. But history is not written by those who fit in. It is shaped by those who dared to retrieve their fragments from the vault. Artists who channeled their pain into beauty. Leaders who transformed rage into justice. healers who turn their own wounds into medicine. Your shadow is not a mistake. It is a manifesto. The question is whether you will sign it. Civilization's first lie is that you are born whole. A newborn does not split itself into good and bad. It screams when hungry, clings to warmth, demands attention without apology. Then, the surgery begins. Parents reward smiles and silence cries. Teachers punish daydreaming and reward memorization. Religions condemn natural urges and canonize self-denial. The shadow is not innate. It is carved into you, a collection of exiles created by every time you were told, hide this, shame that, cut this away to belong. Jung traced the birth of the shadow to humanity's oldest survival tactic, fitting in. Tribal humans who cooperated lived. Those who defied the group risked exile and death. Your brain still runs this ancient software. To stay safe, you learn to disown any trait that threatens your place in the modern tribe. A boy laughs at his friend's tears, then learns men do not cry. A girl hides her intelligence to avoid being called bossy. Survival trumps authenticity. The self divides. These splits are not accidents. They are rituals. A child forced to share toys before understanding ownership learns generosity is a performance. A teenager punished for questioning authority learns curiosity is dangerous. Culture does not shape the shadow with malice. It shapes the shadow with fear. Fear of chaos, fear of rejection, fear of the raw humanity that defies control. You are not born with a vault in your mind. You are handed the lock and key by a world terrified of what you might become. Jung's own shadow nearly destroyed him. In 1913, at the peak of his career, he began hearing voices, seeing visions, slipping into trances. Colleagues called it a psychosis. Jung called it a confrontation. He documented dialogues with a figure named Philemon, a manifestation of his shadow, who taunted him with truths his polished persona could not face. You are not a genius. You are a coward. You lecture about the psyche while suffocating your own. His breakdown was not a collapse. It was a rebellion. The shadow always fights for air. These fractures are not unique. A mother teaches her daughter to be polite while secretly resenting her own lifetime of swallowed rage. A corporate lawyer climbs the ladder by suffocating his artistic impulses, only to drown them in whiskey each night. The shadow grows in the gap between who you are and who you are allowed to be. Every should, every must, every good people do not, deposits another layer of debris in the vault. The collective shadow is even darker. History's greatest atrocities were not born from individual evil, but from mass disownership. The Holocaust did not begin with gas chambers. It began with ordinary citizens disowning their capacity for hatred, projecting it onto a scapegoat. The greed that fuels economic inequality is not a few tyrants' flaw. It is the shadow of a society that worships progress while disowning its hunger for exploitation. What you refuse to see in yourself, you will annihilate in others. This is the shadow's origin story. Not a personal failure, but a cultural inheritance. You inherit your ancestors' unresolved fears like genetic code. A grandmother who survived famine hoards food in her grandchild, morphing survival instinct into pathological control. A father who was shamed for poverty drives his son to chase wealth at the cost of joy. The vault is not yours alone. It is a family heirloom, stuffed with generations of disowned pain. Reclaiming the shadow is not self-help, it is counterculture. To unlearn the lies, you must defy the very systems that raised you. A woman who discovers her repressed ambition will be called cold. A man who embraces vulnerability will be mocked as weak. The world profits from your fragmentation. It sells you religions to medicate guilt, therapies to manage symptoms, distractions to numb the ache of living half alive. Jungian philosophy offers no relief, only a truth. Integration requires burning the old rulebook and writing your own. The child who is scolded for crying grows into an adult who cannot grieve. The artist who buried her silly dreams becomes a teacher who crushes her students' creativity. The cycle repeats until someone refuses to pass down the vault. That refusal is your responsibility. The origin of the shadow is not your fault. Its persistence is your choice. Tomorrow's dictators and saints are being formed today. In living rooms where children learn to hate parts of themselves, in schools that reward conformity over curiosity, in cultures that pathologize depth as too intense, the shadow does not begin in the dark. It begins in the first lie you were told about who you are allowed to be. The question is not where it came from. The question is whether you will end the inheritance. A marathon runner collapses mid-race, lungs burning, legs failing. Doctors find nothing wrong. The problem is not her body. It is the years of repressed rage at her coach's cruelty, now devouring her from within. Ignoring the shadow does not make it disappear. It turns it into a parasite. Every disowned trait drains your energy. The man who denies his need for rest works until his heart fails. The woman who shames her sexuality stays in a marriage that suffocates her soul. The shadow does not sleep. It amplifies. It twists unmet needs into obsessions, unspoken truths into lies, unexpressed desires into compulsions. You call it burnout, anxiety, midlife crisis. Jung called it the shadow declaring war. Relationships fracture under the weight of what goes unspoken. A husband's secret envy of his wife's success poisons their marriage with passive aggression. A friend's buried resentment over unpaid debts explodes into a friendship's end. The shadow speaks through subtext, sarcastic jokes, backhanded compliments, sudden silences heavy with everything you refuse to say. Love cannot grow in a minefield. The body keeps score. Migraines flare in the executive who denies her hatred of the corporate grind. Chronic pain grips the people-pleaser who never learned to say no. Studies reveal a chilling link between repressed emotions and disease. Cancer cells feeding on unexpressed grief. Autoimmune disorders flourishing in the soil of swallowed anger. The shadow does not compromise, it metastasizes. Societies pay a steeper price. Racism, corruption, and environmental destruction are not mere moral failures. They are collective shadows. A culture that disowns its history of violence will repeat it. A nation that denies its greed will plunder the earth to feed its hunger. The Holocaust, colonialism, climate collapse. These are not anomalies. They are shadows writ large. The sum of millions of silenced truths, weaponized. The greatest cost is unrealized potential. A teacher with a gift for storytelling bores students with rigid lesson plans, terrified of her own creativity. An engineer with revolutionary ideas drowns them in alcohol, fearing the responsibility of genius. The world loses what you refuse to acknowledge. Every silenced instinct, every buried dream, every too much part of you denied oxygen becomes a funeral for the future you could have built. Denial demands constant payment. You spend hours therapizing your anxiety, medicating your depression, numbing your restlessness. treating symptoms while the root cause grows stronger. The shadow does not negotiate. It holds your vitality hostage until you pay attention. Every self-help book, every meditation app, every wellness retreat that fails, they are invoices for the debt you owe yourself. History's most tragic figures are not villains, but those who died strangers to themselves. Van Gogh severed his ear in a clash with his disowned madness. Hemingway swallowed a shotgun to silence the shadow he called the Black Dog. Sylvia Plath sealed her fate the moment she stopped trusting her own darkness. These are not romantic tragedies. They are warnings. The shadow will be heard, through integration or destruction. The clock is ticking. With every year you ignore the vault, the lock rusts. The exiled traits grow claws. The child who learned to hide their sensitivity becomes an adult who cannot cry at their parents' funeral. The artist who buried their hunger for fame spends decades resenting those who dared to shine. The price compounds. The interest is paid in regret. There is no neutral ground. To ignore the shadow is to choose slow suicide. Every act of suppression is a vote against your authenticity. Every rationalization is a brick in the wall between you and your purpose. Jung's warning was unflinching. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The chaos you blame on bad luck, that is your shadow steering. This is the crossroads. You can keep draining your energy to silence the screams from the vault, or you can pry it open, drag the exiled parts into the light, and let them transform from saboteurs to allies. The shadow does not want to destroy you. It wants to reunite you. But time is not infinite. Every day you wait, the cost rises. The choice is not between comfort and pain. It is between the pain of staying fragmented and the power of becoming whole. Tomorrow's freedom begins with today's confrontation. The marathon runner's cure was not more training. It was a scream torn from her lungs in an empty parking lot. A primal release of every unacceptable emotion she had denied. The shadow does not heal in silence. It heals in the storm. A storm does not ask permission to break. Lightning cracks the sky, rivers flood their banks, the land reshapes itself in the chaos. Confronting the shadow is not a meditation, it is a hurricane, a violent reckoning with everything you have denied. This is not a step, it is a surrender. The first rule of shadow work is brutal. You must want the truth more than comfort. A therapist's couch will not save you. Affirmations cannot soothe this. This is the work of archaeologists excavating a mass grave, brushing dirt from bones labeled shame, rage, lust. You do not heal here. You dig. Start with the eruptions. That coworker who irritates you for no reason. What trait do they mirror that you have disowned? The friend whose success stings like a betrayal. Where have you abandoned your own ambition? The shadow speaks in projections. Every judgment is a confession. Every trigger is a map to your vault. Journaling becomes a weapon. Not the kind filled with gratitude lists and platitudes. A raw, unfiltered log of every ugly thought. A woman writes, "I hate my sister for being free while I play the martyr." Beneath the guilt, she finds envy. Not for her sister's life, but for her own strangled voice. The page does not judge, it amplifies. Therapy is not a cure. It is a mirror. A CEO admits to his counselor, "I fantasize about burning the company down." The therapist does not pathologize. She asks, "What part of you wants to be free?" Beneath the pyromania lies a poet suffocating in spreadsheets. The shadow does not want destruction. It wants expression. Dreams are telegrams from the vault. A man dreams of snakes biting his hands. His waking life reveals a career built on manipulating others. Hands that create nothing, only control. The snake is not a threat, it is a truth. Your poison is not in your venom, but in your denial of it. They indict. Confrontation demands physical form. A dancer channels her repressed aggression into a routine so visceral it leaves audiences breathless. A former nun smashes pottery in a rage room, shattering her lifetime of forced serenity into dust. The body must revolt before the mind can listen. Resistance is inevitable. A voice will whisper, "This is too dark. You are becoming a monster." That voice is not wisdom. It is the panic of a system built on lies. The founder of psychoanalysis, Freud, abandoned shadow work for this reason. It threatened his neatly packaged theories of repression. Jung chose the storm. The breakthrough comes in the breakdown. A mother admits she resents her children. A pastor confesses he doubts God. A philanthropist acknowledges he hates the poor. These are not moral failures. They are gates opening. The shadow does not soften when faced. It roars. And in that roar you hear your own power. This is the paradox. The traits you feared would destroy you become lifelines. A man's obsessive jealousy, when confronted, reveals a capacity for loyalty so fierce it rebuilds his marriage. A woman's irrational anxiety, when decoded, becomes the hypervigilance that protects her team from disaster. The shadow's chaos is unrefined order. Do not confuse this with forgiveness. You are not here to absolve. You are here to interrogate. A killer confronts his shadow not to excuse his crimes, but to understand the disowned rage that fueled them. Integration is not morality, it is clarity. Seeing the full spectrum of your humanity without flinching. The world will resist your awakening. Friends label your honesty too intense. Careers crumble as masks fall. This is not a side effect, it is the point. The shadow's confrontation is a litmus test for every relationship, habit, and belief that thrives on your fragmentation. There is no completion. The storm does not end. It changes direction. A musician who channeled his narcissism into sold-out concerts now battles the shadow of his humility, fearing mediocrity. An activist who weaponized her rage confronts the complacency lurking beneath her passion. The work is cyclic. The confrontation is eternal. You stand at the edge. Behind you, a life half-lived. A maze of shoulds and apologies. Ahead, the howling dark. Jung's words pierce the noise. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. The storm is not your enemy. It is your birthright. Step in. Let it strip you bare. The shadow does not want your fear. It wants your courage. The next phase is not peace. It is power. But first the deluge. A blacksmith does not fear fire. He knows chaos is the womb of creation. Molten ore becomes a blade. Ash becomes steel. Integration is not a victory lap. It is the alchemy of turning poison into medicine. Your darkest traits into your sharpest tools. The process begins with a funeral. You must bury the myth of perfection. A recovering people-pleaser throws away her to-do list and spends a day saying no to every request. A perfectionist artist smears paint across a half-finished canvas, laughing as he ruins it. These are not acts of rebellion. They are rituals of reclaiming power. The shadow integrates through action, not analysis. Your body becomes a laboratory. A woman haunted by selfish desires starts waking up an hour early to write, even if it means neglecting her family's breakfast. A man ashamed of his temper signs up for boxing classes, channeling fury into focused force. The shadow thrives in motion. Passivity is the enemy. Relationships transform into mirrors. A couple argues not to win, but to expose their shadows. He admits envy of her emotional freedom. She confesses resentment of his discipline. Their fights become excavations. The goal is not harmony, it is truth. Love becomes a verb, meaning, I will not let you hide from yourself. A teacher quits her stifling curriculum to lead students into debates that terrify her. A corporate lawyer starts taking stand-up comedy classes, mining his repressed cynicism for punchlines. The shadow does not seek safety. It demands expression in the arena where you feel most exposed. Rituals replace repression. A man journals letters to his deceased father, spewing decades of disowned grief onto the page. A CEO institutes shadow days, where employees share unpopular opinions without consequence. Structure tames chaos. Rhythm domesticates the wild. The world will test your resolve. A daughter's newfound boundaries make her mother cry. A friend accuses you of changing. Colleagues resent your authenticity. This is not a sign of failure. It is proof of evolution. Integration is a threat to anyone invested in your smallness. Vulnerability becomes your compass. A monk shares his sexual fantasies during a sermon. A war veteran writes poetry about the thrill of combat. Shadows dissolve in the light of confession. What you name, you disarm. What you share, you transmute. Creativity is the shadow's mother tongue. A nun dismissed for her heretical paintings creates an exhibition titled The Sacred Obscene. A quiet engineer designs buildings that defy gravity, giving form to his lifelong rebellion against limits. The shadow does not whisper. It sculpts. It composes. It builds. Power shifts from external to internal. A politician admits her lust for influence and channels it into passing laws that protect the vulnerable. A former addict uses his obsessive focus to mentor others through recovery. The trait you feared becomes your fingerprint. The wound becomes your warrant. Integration is never complete. A woman who embraced her rage now wrestles with patience. A man who conquered his shyness battles arrogance. The shadow is not a problem to solve. It is a current to ride. Mastery means surfing the chaos, not escaping it. Legacy is reshaped. A father teaches his son to cry. A CEO leaves her company to start a foundation for misfit artists. Generational curses become heirlooms of strength. What your ancestors buried, you exhume. What they silenced, you amplify. Jung spent his final years building a stone tower by hand. A physical manifestation of his psyche. Each room represented a facet of his shadow. He did not retire there to hide. He worked there to remember. Integration is not a destination. It is a daily practice of returning to the forge. The final truth is merciless. You will never be whole. Wholeness is a mirage. But in the space between who you were and who you are becoming, the musician's narcissism becomes charisma. The control freak's rigidity becomes precision. The outcast's alienation becomes vision. The shadow does not complete you. It launches you. Your life is now a referendum. Every choice either deepens the integration or resurrects the vault. There are no neutral acts. To eat is to choose nourishment over deprivation. To speak is to choose truth over camouflage. To love is to choose collision over safety. The shadow is no longer your opponent. It is your engine. The world needs your unrehearsed self. The parent who struggles with rage but stays present. The leader who craves power but wields it for justice. The artist who fears irrelevance but creates anyway. Integration is not about fixing humanity. It is about contributing your unedited fragment to the mosaic. Jung's tower still stands in Switzerland. Wind howls through its empty rooms. Stones bear the marks of his hands. The message is clear. Integration leaves a monument. Not of perfection, but of audacity. Your shadow is waiting to lay the first brick. The compass pointing to your destiny is not in your virtues. It is buried in the parts of yourself you have labeled unacceptable. A philanthropist's relentless generosity masks a fear of being seen as selfish. Until she channels that fear into founding a charity that saves thousands. A rebel's defiance, long condemned as reckless, becomes the courage to pioneer a movement. Your shadow does not obscure your purpose, it encrypts it. Jungian philosophy crushes the myth of the calling. Purpose is not discovered through inspiration. It is forged in the collision between your light and your dark. The monk's piety means nothing without his wrestle with lust. The activist's rage gains direction only after facing her capacity for apathy. Your greatest contribution to the world will be born from the trait you most want to exile. History's icons were not paragons of purity. Einstein's stubbornness, condemned by teachers as arrogance, fueled his defiance of physics' old laws. Frida Kahlo's physical agony and turbulent passions, once sources of shame, became the brushstrokes of her immortality. They did not transcend their shadows, they weaponized them. Your resume is a distraction. The traits you omit from LinkedIn hold the clues. That flaky tendency to abandon projects? It might be your soul rejecting work that lacks meaning. The impulsive decisions your family criticizes? They could be your intuition refusing to settle. Society's labels are illusions. Your shadow's whispers are the only resume that matters. A test exists. Take every beat you have ever judged in others. The colleague's narcissism, the friend's laziness, the stranger's greed. And ask, where have I disowned this in myself? The entrepreneur who loathes a competitor's showmanship discovers her own repressed desire to captivate. The pastor who judges his son's rebellion confronts his own caged wildness. Your judgments are breadcrumbs leading back to your unlived life. Vocation emerges from integration, not aspiration. A lawyer's knack for dismantling arguments transforms from a weapon into a scalpel when he accepts his love of destruction. A nurse's obsessive need for control becomes life-saving precision once she stops shaming it. The shadow does not give you purpose. It reveals the form your purpose must take to be authentic. The world's desperation is your shadow's leverage. Climate collapse demands the stubbornness you muted to keep peace in meetings. Political corruption requires the confrontational rage you buried to be liked. Your most problematic trait is the exact mutation needed to heal a fractured niche of reality. What you consider a flaw, evolution's bet on your contribution. Children know this truth instinctively. A girl labeled bossy becomes a CEO who revolutionizes an industry. A boy called too sensitive becomes a therapist who saves marriages. The adult's task is not to invent a purpose, but to recover the instinct their shadow was punished for expressing. A deadline looms. With each year you silence the shadow, a version of your destiny atrophies. The teacher who suppresses her dominance to seem nurturing will never command the stage her ideas deserve. The artist who numbs his darkness with medication will never paint the visions that haunt his sleep. Purpose is not lost. It is abandoned daily through small acts of self-betrayal. Legacy is shaped in the minds, not the museums. A mother's unresolved trauma becomes her daughter's crusade for mental health reform. A community's silenced history of injustice becomes a playwright's award-winning script. Your shadow is not yours alone. It is a relay race, a baton of raw potential passed from ancestors to the unborn. What you integrate today echoes in centuries you will never see. Jung's final words were not of peace, but of unfinished work. On his deathbed, he told his son, "The answers are not in the light. Keep digging in the dark. Your life's purpose will not fit in a mission statement. It will smell of sweat and soil and the iron tang of blood. It will scare you. It will save you. It will demand everything. The proof is in your resistance." The voice hissing, "Who are you to shine?" is the shadow's final test. Crush it with the truth. You are the one who stopped hiding. The world's hunger for your unedited self is greater than its judgment. Your purpose was never about being good. It is about being dangerous enough to matter. Stand at the edge of your vault. Peer into its chaos. Beneath the shame, the rage, the too muchness, a pulse thrums. That is not the rhythm of brokenness. It is the heartbeat of a life too vital to be contained. The shadow does not offer a purpose. It issues a demand. Choose the pain of becoming over the safety of decaying. Then march. The march begins now. The most dangerous lie you tell yourself is, "I will deal with this later." Later is a graveyard where purpose rots. Later is the delusion of cowards. Your shadow is not waiting. It is starving. Feed it now, or spend your life nursing its hunger. This is not a philosophy, it is a war cry. Jung did not write books to entertain intellectuals. He wrote to awaken the dragons sleeping in the basements of human souls. Your dragon is awake. It is breathing fire on the lies you used to call truth. The only question left is whether you will ride it or let it burn you alive. Your legacy hangs on a single choice. Comment 1. Shadow trait you will integrate this week. Not a vague confession, a name, selfishness, arrogance, lust, greed. Naming it strips its power. Posting it binds you to action. This is not a discussion, it is a declaration. Commit to one act of integration within the next 24 hours. The mother who resents her children takes a solo trip. The workaholic schedules an hour of useless play. The people-pleaser says no to a request that drains them. Action is the antidote to self-deception. Motion proves you are serious. Resistance will scream. It will invent emergencies, fatigue, reasons to delay. Crush it with a vow. I will no longer sacrifice my destiny for comfort. The calluses you build today become the armor for tomorrow's battles. Jung's final challenge echoes through time. You are what you do, not what you say you will do. The world is overstocked with gurus and understocked with warriors. Become the exception. Post your trait. Take your step. Burn the bridge of someday. History's great contributors were not fearless. They were traitors to their own resistance. Van Gogh painted with the madness he was told to medicate. Mandela channeled his rage into reconciliation. Your shadow is not a burden. It is a badge of honor waiting to be claimed. The clock's hands are blades. Every minute spent hesitating is a cut to your potential. You do not need more information. You need more guts. This video is not content. It is a confrontation. Stand. Walk to the mirror. Say the trait out loud. Then go do the thing your shadow has been begging for. Not tomorrow. Now. Scream into a pillow. Quit the job. Write the letter. Confess the truth. Let the chaos of becoming drown out the noise of doubt. Your ancestors are watching, the generations before you who buried their shadows in silence, in duty, in fear. They are begging you to break the chain. The generations after you, unborn but already carrying your unresolved pain, are pleading for your courage. This is your summons, not to sainthood, to sovereignty. The comment section is your first battleground. The act you choose is your first flag planted in enemy territory. Jung's work ends here. Yours begins. Type it. Do it. Now. The rest of your life is counting on this moment.